Have you ever found yourself alone on a dark, deserted highway, with nothing but the hum of your engine and the vast empty night stretching out before you? What if, in that endless expanse of darkness, something started to follow you? Something that didn't belong to this world, something that was waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. Get ready, because the story you're about to hear will take you to the edge of fear, where every shadow hides a secret and every sound is a potential threat. It was a typical night on the road, or so I thought. As a long-haul trucker with over a decade of experience, I was used to the solitude, the endless stretches of highway, and the occasional strange encounter. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. I was driving through the heart of the Midwest, the landscape around me flat and featureless, with only the occasional farm or small town breaking the monotony. The sun had long since set, and the sky was an inky black, dotted with a few faint stars. The road ahead was empty, the only light coming from my headlights as they cut through the darkness. I had been driving for hours and fatigue was starting to set in, so I decided to pull over at the next truck stop to rest for the night. When I finally spotted a sign for a truck stop, I took the exit and followed the narrow, winding road until I reached the lot. It was a rundown place, the kind that had clearly seen better days. The parking lot was mostly empty, with only a few other trucks scattered around. I parked my rig near the edge of the lot, away from the others, and shut off the engine. The sudden silence was almost deafening, and I felt a strange sense of unease settle over me. As I stepped out of the cab, I noticed two other truckers standing near their rigs, talking in low voices. They seemed tense, constantly glancing around as if expecting something to jump out of the shadows. I couldn't make out much of their conversation, but I caught one phrase that stuck with me. "Watch out for the lizards." I frowned, unsure of what they meant. Lizards? Out here, in the cold Midwest? It didn't make any sense. I shrugged it off, assuming it was some local slang or an inside joke, and headed inside the small diner that was still open. The place was nearly empty, with only a couple of tired-looking patrons nursing cups of coffee. The waitress behind the counter barely acknowledged me as I sat down and ordered a coffee of my own. As I sipped the hot, bitter liquid, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this place. There was a tension in the air, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The other patrons kept to themselves, avoiding eye contact, and the waitress seemed distracted, her eyes constantly flicking toward the windows. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. I finished my coffee quickly and left the diner, heading back to my truck. As I walked across the parking lot, the night seemed to close in around me. The darkness was thick, almost tangible, and the cold bit at my skin through my jacket. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but every time I turned around, there was nothing there, just the empty lot and the dark shapes of the trucks. When I finally climbed back into my cab, I locked the doors and pulled the curtains shut, trying to block out the unsettling atmosphere. I settled into the bunk, pulling the blankets up to my chin, and tried to get some sleep. But the unease lingered, keeping me on edge. If this story has you feeling uneasy, make sure to like and share this video. There's more to come, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. I must have drifted off at some point, but my sleep was restless, filled with strange, disjointed dreams that left me feeling even more unsettled. I woke up several times during the night, each time with the distinct impression that something was wrong. The last time I woke, it was to the sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel outside my truck. I froze, listening intently. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, moving around the truck in a pattern that didn't make sense. It was as if whoever or whatever it was circling my rig, trying to find a way in. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I knew I should check, but fear kept me rooted to the spot. The footsteps stopped suddenly, and I held my breath, waiting. Then there was a sharp knock on the door of my cab. It was so loud in the silence of the night that I nearly jumped out of my skin. I waited, but there was no second knock, no voice calling out, just silence. I finally mustered the courage to peek through the curtains, but there was no one there, only the empty lot and the other trucks, dark and silent. I sat back down, trying to convince myself that it had just been my imagination, that I was tired and hearing things. But deep down, I knew better. Something was out there, something that didn't belong. As I lay back down, the hissing started. It was faint at first, like a whisper just out of earshot. But it grew louder, more insistent, like something was trying to communicate with me. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out. But the sound only seemed to grow louder, wrapping around me like a cold, clammy blanket. The footsteps returned, this time closer, accompanied by a low, guttural moan that sent chills down my spine. I could hear the sounds of movement outside, the rustling of clothing, the soft scrape of something against the metal of my truck. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. I lay there in the darkness, every nerve on edge, waiting for something to happen. I could hear the wind outside, the occasional creak of the truck as it settled, but nothing else. No more footsteps, no more hissing, just silence. But I knew better than to believe it was over. I could feel it, the presence of something just beyond the reach of the light, watching, waiting. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you have the courage to check outside, or would you stay put? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's see how many of you have experienced something similar. I must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The first rays of dawn were just starting to break through the darkness, casting a pale light across the lot. I sat up slowly, every muscle in my body aching from the tension of the night before. My mind was still reeling from the events of the night, and I had a hard time convincing myself that it had all been real. I opened the curtains cautiously, half expecting to see something or someone waiting for me outside. But the lot was empty, the other trucks still parked where they had been the night before. I hesitated for a moment, then opened the door and stepped out into the cold morning air. The lot was quiet, the only sound the crunch of gravel under my boots as I walked around my truck. There were no signs of the night's disturbances, no footprints, no scratches, nothing. It was as if the events of the night had been nothing more than a bad dream. But the lingering sense of dread in my gut told me otherwise. As I prepared to leave, I noticed the two truckers from the night before standing near their rigs, talking quietly. They looked tired, their faces drawn and pale. When they saw me, they nodded in my direction, a silent acknowledgement of the strange night we had all endured. I thought about asking them what they had experienced, but something stopped me. I didn't want to know. Whatever it was better left unspoken. I climbed back into my cab, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot without looking back. The road stretched out before me, long and empty, and I was eager to put as much distance between myself and that truck stop as possible. But even as I drove, the memory of the night stayed with me, a constant reminder that some things are better left unexplained. As the miles rolled by, I found myself thinking about the warning I had overheard. Watch out for the lizards. I still didn't know what it meant, but I had a feeling that whatever had happened that night, it was connected to that cryptic phrase. I've encountered many strange things in my years on the road, but nothing quite like that night. It was a reminder that the world is full of mysteries, some of which are better left undisturbed. I don't know if I'll ever truly understand what happened that night, but one thing is certain. I'll never forget it. And I'll always be careful when I'm out on the road, especially in those lonely, isolated places where the shadows seem to have a life of their own. Those places where the silence is so deep, you can almost hear your own thoughts echoing back at you. Where the darkness feels heavier, thicker, as if it's hiding something just out of sight. I've learned to trust my instincts, to listen to that inner voice that warns me when something isn't right. As I continued down the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that the events of that night were far from over. The road ahead was long, and I knew I would encounter many more truck stops, many more nights alone in the dark. But I also knew that I would never let my guard down again. Whatever had been out there that night, it had taught me a valuable lesson. Never assume you're alone, even when all evidence points to the contrary. I've told this story to a few close friends in the trucking community, and the reactions have been mixed. Some laugh it off, dismissing it as a bad dream or an overactive imagination. Others, the ones who've had their own unsettling experiences on the road, nod in understanding. They know that out here, on these endless stretches of highway, the line between reality and nightmare can sometimes blur. I've tried to put that night behind me, to move on and focus on the road ahead. But every time I pass a lonely truck stop in the dead of night, I can't help but think back to that warning. Watch out for the lizards. I still don't know what it means, but it haunts me. It's a reminder that there are things out there, things that defy explanation, things that we're better off not knowing. As I continue my journey, the miles rolling by beneath my wheels, I carry that memory with me. It's a part of me now, a constant companion on the long, lonely stretches of road. And every time the night closes in and the shadows begin to move, I remind myself to stay alert, to keep my eyes open, and to be ready for whatever might be lurking just beyond the edge of the light. If this story sent chills down your spine, be sure to subscribe to Nightmare Narratives and hit the notification bell so you never miss another terrifying tale. Join us as we continue to explore the unknown, where every shadow hides a secret and every night brings new horrors.